Hey everyone, it's Brian here from Massey's Main Entertainment. Got a chance to recover a little bit here because I've been battling this crazy cold that's been like going throughout the United States and Canada, it seems, for the last few weeks. And I really wanted to get a circle back and get into this series that I've been working on. Was this album really that good? And I know a few weeks ago, my friend here, Alex, he approached me about the possibility of doing this particular album that we're going to talk about today. Say hi to everybody, Alex.
Hi, everybody. Alex, Beer and Vinyl is the channel that I go with on YouTube here, and Brian, you and I have gone back and forth, or have been in similar circles, I guess, for a long time, but we've never done something.
No,
so I'm really looking forward to this.
yeah, it's going to be awesome. So, the album we're going to cover today is going to be "Dummy" by Portishead. Came out in 1994. It's cornerstone of trip hop genre, blending the haunting atmospheres, some sultry vocals, great contralto voice from Beth Gibbons, innovative production techniques. This groundbreaking debut fuses hip hop, jazz, electronica against this very, I think, noir-like backdrop of melancholy. Gibbons' emotionally charged lyrics explore heartbreak, introspection, and it's really a critically acclaimed Bristol-based band. So the tracks on Dummy are cinematic, they're immersive, they stand out so well. Some of the other musicians on here, like the Jeff Borrow and Adrian Utley, which I have massive respect for because of his jazz background, provide this really great retro fused aesthetic to it as well. It was a commercial success. I mean, even I think surprisingly so, considering the state of music in the 90s was mostly centered around grunge and Britpop a little bit, but it inspired countless artists, and it won the Mercury Prize in 1995. Despite being up against really some solid competition that year, I think Oasis probably would have been even up for album for the Mercury Prize that year. So anyway, I really appreciate Alex joining me today. How this format usually goes is my guests will always speak first. They can speak as much as they want, have as much fun with it and as they want. And I'm really kind of looking forward to your thoughts on this. I mean, I lived through this because I was a station manager at an alternative station right around this time. So I got to see this, almost live in action, as it was kind of progressing through the music world. But I'm curious about your thoughts, and I'll take the last word. So Alex, kick us off.
Yeah. So again, thanks, Brian.
Yeah.
This is awesome. So a couple different things. I had heard of Portishead for years. I had heard of this record. I sort of knew of its importance in the greater sort of musical landscape. Funny enough, and I kind of wanted to joke about this because I think this is an area that you are more educated in, is that for the longest time, I never actually knew what trip hop was. Like, I just heard it used, and I was like, trip hop, that just sounds like a funnier version of hip hop. So I was like, I never actually, looked up sort of okay, where does this come from? And a lot of things that you explained in the intro of, there's certainly some hip hop elements, specifically in like the rhythmic pieces and in the percussive pieces and that sort of stuff. But a lot of this ambience, a lot of atmosphere, a lot of jazz influences, some of the electronica stuff, all that type of stuff. So I think for me, ignorantly, it was always just one of those things that I never really dived into, even though I had heard about it so many times. And really, it didn't come to a head for me until last year. I had heard and bought this record, Lives Outgrown, from Beth Gibbons, obviously the lead vocalist of Portishead. And I had heard this and just loved it. And what was so interesting is I was sitting there going, I really love this, but I'm not sure I like Portishead. And I don't really have anything that informed that decision. It was like, I probably had spot checked Dummy at some point in time, go through and listen to 30 seconds here, 20 seconds here. And that's never a proper way to do these things. But I was always like, I really love this. And then it was interesting starting here and then going back 30 years to kind of obviously identify the differences, but also the similarities, right? So for me, I was really excited for this. I do like to kind of stretch out my musical boundaries a little bit. And was really excited to dive into this. And yeah, as you sort of alluded to, I mean, I was sitting here, I have the page pulled up of, I mean, acclaimed, everybody loves this record of the year. It became the standard of trip hop, right? Like this whole thing. And one of the things I will say before kind of diving into some of the favorites and all that kind of stuff is 30 years later, I'm listening to this and I'm going, especially when that opening track kicks off, and I'm going, this is out there. Like, I'm going like, what in the world is this? And so I could only imagine what people like you were thinking when you heard it in 1994.
Yeah.
I mean, there must have been I mean, I'm curious, like there was nothing like this going on. This sort of fusion amalgamation of all these things. And I will say it's aged extremely well too, yeah, hearing it so many years later. I mean, would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. As I said, I've just listened to it probably 5 times in the last couple of weeks after having listened to it periodically. This album's aged extremely well. I think as the forefront of trip hop music has always been the Mount Rushmores it's always been Portishead and Massive Attack and DJ Shadow and Tricky. Those guys have like pretty much are the Mount Rushmore, but the influence that this album and maybe Mezzanine had on the music world going forward, if you start thinking about things like glitch pop and post rock and intelligent dance music, this album right here is like, this is a good precursor album for people to listen to.
Yeah.
They want to get into those things.
And one of the things I find so interesting too about this is, so on my, channel and I'm a huge record collector, right? The whole, beer and vinyl thing. Huge record collector. And my taste is obviously a lot of classic rock, hard rock, very similar stuff to what a lot of people on YouTube talk about. But I'm a huge prog fan. Like I will find like the out of print, super valuable, random progressive rock artist from Scotland from 1968 and try to find that. Like that is my thing. But over the years, I've opened up more and more to get away from this idea of prog rock, this like sort of, Keith Emerson playing 45-minute, keyboard solos, and more into this idea of, okay, what does it mean for music to be progressive? What does it mean for music to be pulling from so many influences and to never stay the same and to infuse different styles and genres? And what's funny is as I'm listening to this record and as I have so much over the last several weeks, I'm sitting here going, yeah, I'm not going to call Dummy a prog record. But I think in terms of what was going on at the time, I mean, you're at the height of grunge right now, right? It's like, yeah, I mean, what's going on at the time, I would have heard this and said, this is some of the most progressive music I've ever heard. And so, and what I appreciate about this too is, we'll get into it, is that a lot of the elements of this record, again, that was sort of pulling from the hip hop background, is the use of samples, but in a very, very different way, right? I mean, they're pulling in jazz samples, they're pulling in old school soul samples, they're pulling in, there's a war sample on here. There's so many of these different areas that they're pulling from, and pulling that and using it again in this very atmospheric sort of way. For me, what stands out more than individual tracks is just sort of how the record sounds and is put together as a whole. That is something that really stands out for me. I will say it took me a while to track this down because this has been sorely out of print for the longest time. And sometimes it shows up and sometimes you wait 2 years for it.
Yeah.
But maybe I'll be burying the lead here a little bit. I liked the record a lot.
Wow.
I liked it a lot. And I had to go buy it.
Yeah.
It's
a must have.
And this is, you might be able to speak to this. So this is actually Beth, right?
Yeah, it's like from I think it was a film associated with this as well. And this was like a screenshot from a film clip. Yeah. Yeah.
And you know what? This, first of all, I mean, that is some out there creepy type stuff.
Yeah, it is.
And it sort of lays that foundation, especially for how the album starts off, right? I mean, again, like, heard nothing like it. This is so creepy. What I will say about Beth's voice, I think I've struggled with how to articulate her voice. To to me, the strength of her voice is in the sort of, I don't want to say imperfection of it, but it's not a particularly like strong in your face voice, but it's something that fits what's going on so perfectly. There are these subtleties of, again, I don't want to say imperfection because that makes it sound like it's a negative thing, but there's a vulnerability with it. There's a obviously like sort of like a wistful sort of sense to it, but it plays into it so well. One of my favorite parts of this whole album, and I know I'm kind of jumping around here,
Yeah,
but
good.
you know, is the track "It Could Be Sweet," where she goes through, and there's this part after like the second or third voice where she kind of does like this, I don't know, it's like this breathe into the microphone sort of thing that I'm like, oh, that was so sexy. Like whatever that was. And I will say too, and granted, I was listening to this on vinyl a lot. This is a headphones record to
Yeah.
me. This is a get something good, put it on, block everything else out. This is not a go do your dishes sort of thing while music's playing in the background. But yeah. The huge hit on here was Glory Box, which closes it out. That was something that I think is still kind of heard, at least more so. I think a lot of people, even if they aren't familiar with the album, have probably heard that song somewhere.
That or Sour Times seems to be the two that show
Yes.
the most.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And what was funny, I wanted to pull this because I thought it was cool. When I was hearing Glory Box, I was like, okay, I've definitely heard this song before. But I also like this sounds more familiar than something I just like heard on the radio. And then finally, I like looked it up and I was like, that's right. And it was pulled from Isaac Hayes.
Isaac Hayes, yeah.
What is that? Ike's Rap 2 or whatever.
Yeah.
Black Moses, which I love this album. I love Isaac Hayes. And I was like, and that I think is what makes this is one of the areas that makes this record so compelling to me is, again, the use of samples, which I'm not a huge fan of. Really, I don't want to say I'm not a huge fan of like hip hop, but I think sampling over time has evolved a lot from the 80s and certainly the early 90s into what it is sort of used as now.
Yeah.
Which now it kind of seems like the sample is the hook, where
Yeah.
back in those days it was like, no, we're pulling from a lot of different areas to put something more original together. So I don't know, I've blabbed along a lot about this. I love the record. I'm really grateful that this was a experience that we could have, and truthfully too, it makes me not only want to dive into more. I think they've only released 3 records.
3. Yeah.
And they did one like semi, like what was it, 95, 96, like semi right after this one.
Yeah, that's probably my least favorite one, I think.
Okay.
So
but you've mentioned too of like, I've heard of Massive Attack
yeah,
a gazillion times. I know nothing about them. Is this the gateway into more music like this, or are they so completely different?
Massive Attacks, I think, is different. It really it's a little heavier, not as jazzy,
Mm-hmm.
And again, some of the samples they use are going to come a little bit more from more alternative areas from the 80s and stuff like that. And I love Massive Attack. I think Mezzanine is just an incredibly underrated album. I think it's only known for Teardrop, which was the song that Elizabeth Fraser wrote. She was in the studio with Massive Attack just doing some regular vocals, and when she heard Jeff Buckley had passed away, she sat down and wrote Teardrop. And that's the highlight song on there. And I think that people would know it because it's the theme song from the television show House.
Yep.
It's the same music. So most people know it from that. But yeah, definitely Massive Attack is something that's got to be checked out. If you want to kind of keep it depends on how, DJ Shadow's more toward the hip hop. It's more sample based than it is anything else. And they're recognizable samples.
Yeah.
And Tricky is really, maybe too far to hip hop for my liking. I didn't like some of their stuff as much because it was a lot of rapping over top of that same type of vibe. So
And truthfully too, I'll real quick, I will say, probably a lot of the reason I love this and who knows if I'll love that stuff as much is because of the jazzy influences. I mean, obviously both from the musicianship side. This was the other one. The other huge jazz sample that I had to pull, because I mean, this show's about my collection, is they're pulling from Elegant People from Black Market Weather Report, which, I mean, this is like a fusion classic here. I mean, it's a Wayne Shorter composition, and so I'm sitting there going, man, again, like listening to this, I'm going, what? I've never heard anything like this before in my life, but they're pulling from Isaac Hayes and Wayne Shorter. Like that to me, again, going back to the point, I was like, that to me is incredibly, again, progressive in the more philosophical sense, but just something that blew my mind and kept me coming back.
Adrian Utley played, he played in the Messengers, Art Blakey's Messengers.
Yeah.
So when he was on tour and stuff. And so it's, this is a guy that's definitely eclectic, he has such a vintage collection of instruments that it doesn't surprise me all the different instruments you hear on this album. Yeah. I mean, who in the world would have thought to use a theremin?
Right.
You know what I mean? When I first heard that at the beginning of the album all those years ago, and you get that Star Trek vibe, of course, because that's where just kind of mostly known people would know a theremin from. But I'm like, wow, who could use that and use it effectively? Who would have thought to do that?
Right? And I think the record originally was put together analog.
Yeah.
Which is also blows my mind. And I think, again, kind of pays that homage to what we love so much about music and recordings and all that type of stuff too.
You talk about Beth's vocals. It reminds me, I think, and you mentioned It Could Be Sweet. Her voice in that track reminded me of Sade, that 80s Sade vibe where there's just enough quirkiness, to be endearing to me. Because I don't like these perfectly produced vocals all the time where it's auto-tuned to the point that there's no imperfection. I just think there's something inauthentic about that. Yeah. And I really appreciate her voice in that. And even on Glory Box, who she reminds me of, I wrote down like a little note. I'm going, it's kind of a neo Nina Simone.
Yeah.
I mean, Nina has this weird, quirky voice it's odd, but something's beautiful about it.
And proto Amy Winehouse almost too.
Yeah, there you go. That's another great example.
Yeah.
I totally agree. I mean, I wrote down my 5 favorite tracks of obviously Mysterons, Sour Times. You had It Could Be Sweet. So did I. Rhodes was probably, I think, her best vocal performance in it. Yep. I really did like it. That contralto voice shines through really, really well. But Wandering Star, man, is just that with that war sample in there. That song blows me away. Yep. It's absolutely my favorite. And I put it in here too. Early indications of glitch pop, intelligent dance music, maybe even some down tempo. Rhodes sounded like Roxy music to me musically. So I put out big shout out Brian Ferry, Brian Eno. I mean, this doesn't surprise me that they sound like these people because I know they must have drawn some influences from some of these early bands like that. And I think it's tremendous. What would you score this record? What would you
do, like a scoring out of 10 or?
We do out of 10 to give us a little flexibility. Out of 5, it's like you feel
you're right.
It has to be more than the 3, and it's weird.
Yeah, I struggle. I will say I struggle with scoring. I typically don't score things, or people have given me grief for scoring things too high. There's somebody out there, him because you've done videos with him before, and I'm not going to mention his name, but he's going to know that he claims he could never have more than 10 albums that he rates a 10 out of 10. I hope you're listening. I hope you're watching, Sam. So,
oh, come on, Sam. Well,
so I was like, no, I know a ton of 10 out of 10s. This is tough because it's sitting here. It's like, well, if I don't give it a 10, I'm going to need to have a reason why I wouldn't.
Right.
I would be probably in like 8.5 range here.
That's great. That's great score.
Yeah. And again, I can't. I cannot. I think if there were any quote unquote flaws, I don't want to talk about flaws, but what would keep it from being like a 10? I mean, here's the thing. I mean, it is, even if it's not a genre of music that I'm as familiar with or, as big of a fan of, I don't think anybody could argue its importance, not only to the genre itself, but really is the sound of the genre. I mean, this became the model, right? But
Yeah.
also was never often imitated, never duplicated, right?
Yeah.
Um, I think what's interesting. I'm curious from your side too. I don't have um, shoot where to go. Looking here, it's a fire. Um, do you have that on your like when you've listened to it? Do you have that track?
Mm, let me look. Hold on a second.
So yeah, apparently it wasn't released on original.
It's on. Yeah, it's the track after Wandering Star on mine.
Yep. So I don't have that
Oh,
because it was never released on the vinyl. Um, that's not why I'm holding it back from a 9 or a 10. But
right.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I'd be writing 8 to 8.5 range. I would say what I interesting when you were kind of talking about your favorite tracks on there, which I agreed with a lot of them. The sequencing is very interesting, right? I don't think you can start off with a better track than Mysterons.
Yeah.
I mean, it just you hear that it's so creepy with that. Oh, it's just so perfect.
Yeah.
And there are some heavy hitters, obviously Sour Times on that side one. Side B is interesting because it's like to me it feels like a handful of deeper cuts that I really, really, really like, and then obviously the huge hit. And so, the sequencing's I think really interesting in that way because it is, I think, very balanced in how it starts and how it finishes. But yeah, I mean, I loved this. I could not be more. Well, I guess I could be if I gave it a 10, but just for sake of not giving it a 10, I'm right in that 8 to 8.5 range.
I've got it at an 8.25. I mean,
Okay.
I had it there, and it didn't move very much for me. And come on, Sam doesn't like Visions of Johanna by Bob Dylan, so I'm not sure we can go with Sam here. But shout out Sam, I love you,
Oh,
buddy.
that's it. We love you, Sam.
But I'm not sure how much of opinion we can get from Sam on that one. But even Sam and I are going to be starting an album exchange because he wants to broaden his horizons. I said, all right,
That's cool.
I'll throw some curves at you, and I'm open to new things all the time. So
Yeah.
hey, I really appreciate you being with me on this. Everybody, please check out Alex's channel. I just looked at the haul that you brought in, the video that you had.
Oh,
I
yeah.
watched that yesterday, and I was like, man, I said, geez, $1? Come on, man. It's like,
Running out of space.
yeah. I'm in the same boat right now. I'm looking at my shelves. I'm going, I don't know, man. I don't know what I'm going to do. I just don't
Something's
have
got to give.
this room to fit anything else in here. So,
That's
uh,
right.
but check out Alex's channel, everybody. We appreciate you guys joining us. Let us know what your score would be down below. Even if you haven't listened to Portishead, you haven't listened to any trip hop, I encourage you to check it out. I mean, it's not for everybody, but I always encourage people to kind of stretch those music muscles a little bit. And if anything, it'll just strengthen your resolve on what music you do like. I always say that. So,
For sure.
so everybody take care out there, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.